Hello, welcome everyone to our webinar. Thank you for joining us online today. Just whilst we wait for people to join us, we're going to have a quick survey pop up very shortly, hopefully, just so you can see it. So there we go. It'll be interesting to hear about if there's any regulations that are your top priorities at the moment. Whilst we have you filled that in, I'll just give you a brief introduction. My name's Tom Novotny, and together with our two exciting speakers, we will delve into the topic of building resilient supply chains, environmental strategies for a sustainable future. Now, before we begin, I'll cover off some housekeeping. You can ask any questions during the talks by popping them in the Ask a Question option under the video, and our speakers will aim to answer them at the end of the session. You can also find additional resources and the slides from today's session in the attachment sections. And please don't forget to rate this webinar to let us know your comments or suggestions. So, while some people are completing that, on the polls, if you see them, please complete it. We've got 5 more seconds. Brilliant. Lovely. Thank you very much, and welcome again to everyone who's just joined us. So let me briefly introduce SEDEX and how we support businesses in building responsible, ethical, and sustainable supply chains. SEDEX is a global leader in supply chain management with over 85,000 members and 104,000 supplier sites. With businesses across 180 countries, our reach gives companies unmatched visibility into their entire supply chain. At the core of our offering is SMETA, the world's most recognized social audit. SMETA not only helps you stay ahead of regulations, but also drives best-in-class ethical practices across your supply chain. Powered by over 350,000 audits and millions of data points, our platform delivers actionable insights, enabling smarter decisions, helping you proactively manage supply chain risks. We have 20 years of experience becoming the trusted authority, continually innovating and meeting the evolving demands of global businesses. Whether you manage a few suppliers or thousands, our scalable solutions grow with you, offering effective end-to-end supply chain management. Right, let me introduce our speaker lineup today. So today with us, we have Harley. Harley serves as the environmental subject matter expert at SEDEX, providing expert guidance on environmental due diligence, regulatory compliance, and reporting requirements. With extensive experience in developing net zero pathways for the global events and apparel industries, Harley has also coordinated cross-industry initiatives to standardize carbon accounting and reporting. He's dedicated to helping businesses navigate the evolving landscape of sustainability. And today we also have Byra. Byra is the Senior Product Manager for Environmental Propositions at SEDEX, where she leads the expansion and enhancement of the company's environmental offerings. With a background in developing ESG data products and platforms, Byra brings valuable experience from her work with financial institutions and climate tech startups. She's passionate about driving impactful environmental solutions through innovative and product development. So, as I just talked you through the agenda today, we'll start by discussing some of the key upcoming legislation that will have a significant impact on supply chains, particularly around sustainability and ethical practices. Next, we'll dive into how data analytics can play a transformative role in building and maintaining sustainable supply chains. Building on that, we'll discuss actionable practices that you can incorporate to make your supply chain more sustainable. We'll talk about why integrating both environmental and social aspects into your business model isn't just a regulatory requirement, but a strategic move for long-term corporate success. Finally, I'll open the floor for any questions you may have. So without further ado, let me hand you over to Harley now. Harley.
Thanks, Tom. Hi, everyone. So kind of first point of business really is to look at the overview of upcoming environmental legislation. Obviously, it's a fast-paced and constantly evolving landscape. So what's probably a good starting point is to have a regional review of what's happening across the globe. So in Europe, 2024 has really seen significant steps in environmental legislation activity. Europe continues its focus around strengthening ESG and establishing due diligence and responsible corporate behaviours in companies' operations, with key regulations like CSDDD being adopted earlier this summer. North America really continues its focus on climate, with regulations centred around the disclosure of climate-related risks and greenhouse gas emissions. And usefully, a lot of those kind of are looking to align to familiar reporting frameworks like TCFD, for example. Asia Pacific is a great example of the kind of varying paces and scopes of regulations. Obviously, it's a very complex region to navigate. And as we see, they're developing at various paces. But what we have seen is Hong Kong and Australia both implementing climate-related disclosure requirements, and a really positive trend actually around standardising sustainability reporting, with India aligning to the ISSB's IFRS S1 and S2 standards. So globally, the legislative landscape, it's really good to for us to comprehend what that looks like. As we can see, the landscape is very complex. In total, at this time, there are in excess of 2,400 pieces of ESG legislation, and that's excluding laws centered around chemicals and noise. This map is a really good example and just a small snapshot of some of the regulations affecting companies. So whether it's extended producer responsibility in Chile, or greenhouse gas emissions disclosure in Japan, or supply chain due diligence in Germany, it really does highlight not only the complexity facing many companies, but also the importance and need for them to proactively address and manage their ESG activities to ensure compliance and limit their risk moving forward. So as we look forward to 2025 and 2026, it's worth looking at where we're starting from 2024. Obviously, CSDDD, as was mentioned earlier, was adopted this year, and LKSG, which is the German Supply Chain Due Diligence Act, expanded its reach, now covering companies with a workforce of in excess of 1,000 employees. But the really significant ones that are kind of on people's radar, one of the key ones really is CSRD, and that stands out as that's set to impact more companies than any other piece of sustainability regulation to date, requiring a disclosure across environmental, social, and governance. And it's estimated that 50,000 companies worldwide will be required to disclose, track, and measure their sustainability performance in the first wave of reporting due next year, meaning that companies face a really complex web of disclosure demands, particularly with over 1,000 data points to report on across 10 key ESG topics. And while CSDDD was only just adopted this year and not likely to come into effect until 2027, its requirements on companies to identify, prevent, and mitigate and report on actual and potential adverse impacts on human rights, for example, including forced labour and child labour, and the environment, and whether that be deforestation or pollution, across their own operations and their supply chains, makes 2025 and 2026 really critical for companies to put in place the procedures and resources to plan and prepare for compliance. We can also see, as we look out as well, CBAM, the cross-border carbon border adjustment mechanism, and US regulations like SEC climate rule and State Bill 253 and 261 from California coming into effect. So being prepared through the course of 2025 is really pivotal to making sure that your business is future fit and ready for regulations to come in the coming 2 years. So what are the key takeaways? Hopefully from these previous two slides, you can really see that 2025 is a significant year for environmental legislation. There's a large number of regulations coming into force simultaneously across the globe, impacting more companies than ever before. The scope of those regulations is notably broader. It covers more sectors than previous years, from product design to extended producer responsibility and supply chain due diligence. So while many regulations are EU specific, they do have global implications and global impact as a result of the volume of goods affected by exporting and trading with the region. That also means that there's a convergence of ESG, so coming together of reporting on environmental, social and governance. So those regulations and reporting becoming ever more focused on the collective assessment of those two together, meaning there's an increased need for companies to put in place a strong compliance and reporting structure. All of this can seem really overwhelming, and there's a temptation, I think, for companies to try and address each regulation or compliant in isolation. It's essential that we try to avoid that temptation and not get bogged down in responding to each individually. One of the key aspects of many regulations is that, due to the sheer volume, many of the regulatory bodies that have developed these regulations have been very aware that there's potential for reporting fatigue. So there's been effort to align the requirements with well-established and reporting frameworks to streamline the process. So a key function for most people who are looking to comply with these regulations is really to identify where the interoperability is in the forthcoming regulations and reporting requirements, so you can unlock that robust and efficient compliant reporting. So whether it's using GRI or SASB as your reporting framework, doing so is really going to make sure that you've got a strong reporting and compliance system in place. So moving forward, and how we can look to use data analytics for sustainable supply chains. One of the key problems in compliance is really around environmental data and the challenges that represents. The data, understanding the data that you need to collect is really the kind of key first step. And it sounds a basic one, but it's critical that you're clear on that. So the data that you need to collect, may be based on your company's own sustainability objectives. That may be to reduce emissions as part of your net zero commitment, or it might be because of your company having to comply with one of the regulations that we've mentioned previously. Either way, determining that data you need to collect is critical, so you can understand the data you need and identify where you need to collect it from. If you're not sure what data you need to collect, a great place to start is to use materiality guidance provided by reporting bodies like the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, for example, who provide guidance on the ESG categories most relevant to your industry. Similarly, S&P and MSCI also provide comprehensive industry guidance on materiality. And we've used those sources collectively to support industry filtering in our new ESAQ product. Once you've collected all the data you can, establishing the quality and identifying the potential gaps will help you establish your starting point and develop a strategy to improve that quality and fill data gaps over time. Starting with a clear data set provides that foundation for your future target setting, performance tracking and reporting. So making sure that this data is clean and consistent for each of the metrics that you're tracking is really essential. So whether that's greenhouse gas emissions, water usage, energy usage, it's really essential that that data is clear. Then automating that data collecting process and tracking it in a consistent, secure and reportable platform, it's really going to help to streamline this process and maintain the data's integrity. And that's something that we've certainly looked to integrate within our own products to provide that means for companies to collect data consistently and with integrity. In terms of the KPIs that companies should be tracking and to establish what they are, as I mentioned on the previous slide, using a global standard like the Global Reporting Initiative, GRI or SASB, is really going to help you establish the KPIs most relevant to your business. Using these frameworks helps to provide clear guidelines on what to measure and how to report it, ensuring that the KPIs are consistent, comparable and transparent across industries and regions. In adhering to those standards, like these, companies can demonstrate their commitment to global sustainability objectives. And some of the common KPIs that companies are being requested to track across supply chains are greenhouse gas emissions, energy usage, water management, and biodiversity. Examples of these KPIs can include greenhouse gas emissions, particularly gross scope 1, scope 2 and scope 3 emissions of CO2 equivalent, and that's measured in metric tons. Energy would look to focus around the total energy by source, so gas, electricity, purchased heat and steam in kilowatt hours. And if we consider waste, the most common categories, KPIs measured there are total waste by disposal channel, so by the amount or volume of waste disposed to landfill, recycled or composted in metric tons. So methods to collect that data. Here are some examples of how to go about collecting this data from across your supply chain. One of the most efficient and consistent means of collecting that data is by using supplier surveys and questionnaires. So, for example, using a self-assessment questionnaire to collect that quantitative environmental metrics you need to gather, whether it be energy usage, waste consumption, or greenhouse gas emissions. Making sure that survey is aligned to third-party frameworks like the Carbon Disclosure Project or GRI will help ensure that the data you're capturing is in the format of the required for reporting and is consistent. And by making this part of your supplier code of conduct, whereby you require suppliers to submit their data annually as part of their reporting process, will ensure that you're gathering this data consistently and help you with your future reporting requirements. Integrating data platforms and utilizing technology is another great means to collect this data. So by embracing data integration platforms like supply chain management software, using digital platforms to integrate supplier data into centralized systems helps build consistent real-time tracking and reporting of environmental data. Supplier environmental management systems, probably a harder element to implement due to the scale and scope of integrating these. But by prioritizing working with suppliers who have EMS certification and promote their use with suppliers who don't, doing so is going to ensure that the data gathering processes are in place to make it easier for you to gather the data, while also promoting a more responsible environmental due diligence throughout your supply chain. Training capacity building. This offers a great opportunity to engage with your suppliers and collaborate together by providing training and resources that help build their capabilities and confidence in environmental data gathering, something that is often identified as a key challenge from suppliers when looking to gather data and supply data to their clients. So how can this data provide actionable insights? One of the key elements of a lot of the regulation that is coming into effect over the coming years is identifying the high impact areas in your supply chain or of your business and addressing those. So using environmental data collected can reveal the parts of your supply chain that have the highest environmental impact. So whether it's carbon emissions, waste generation, or water usage, it enables companies to target and hotspot where these impact areas are and take the necessary actions to address them. It's also critical for risk management. Using data such as geographic location enables clients to identify suppliers that are vulnerable to climate change and can help companies assess and mitigate those risks related to the supply chain disruption, offering more robust and secure supply chains. It helps to increase efficiency by identifying areas of excessive resource use, such as energy, water, or materials, meaning that companies can then work with suppliers to optimize resource use, leading to shared benefits such as cost savings and reduced environmental impact. Supplier reporting and benchmarking is also a critical point. It allows the continuous monitoring of environmental data for companies to track progress against their sustainability targets and make informed decisions on where improvements are needed. And it also helps essentially to meet your regulatory compliance requirements. By tracking environmental data, companies can ensure that their suppliers are in compliance with local and international environmental regulations, reducing the risk of legal penalties and supply chain disruptions. And with that, I'll pass over to my colleague, Byra.
Great, thanks, Harley. So in the previous sections, we discussed the upcoming regulations, environmental KPIs, and data that you may want to collect and methods in how to collect them. So as regulations evolve and clients demand more transparency from businesses regarding sustainable practices, it is important to think about how you can adopt new processes and incorporate technologies to promote sustainability within your supply chain. So, in the next section, we will take a look at how market leaders within sustainability are adopting better practices and how they're thinking about using the latest technology. So, monitoring and reducing emissions is a big pain point for many companies due to vast complex supply chains and a lack of good quality data. So, in order to ensure that you are on the path towards net zero, there is a three-step approach every business would need to take to make sure that they reach their targets. So, the first is measure. So, why is it important to measure your emissions? It is important to understand where you currently stand in order to know where you can make improvements and to identify the sources that are contributing the most to your carbon footprint. So, once you have processes in place to measure your carbon footprint, you should establish your baseline and monitor your output to ensure accurate tracking. So, tools and methods that you can use. So, there are carbon calculators, free and paid tools that you could use, life cycle assessments, you could use energy audits, and also third party platforms to collect data from your supply chain. Once you have established the appropriate methodology to measure your emissions, the next step is to create a framework and establish goals and objectives to tackle the most carbon intensive areas of your operations. You should set clear short and long term targets and identify and focus on your high emission areas first. So what you could do is you could incorporate any energy efficient appliances in those high emitting parts of your processes. Engage with your employees, so foster a culture of sustainability and get them involved in carbon reduction initiatives and training. Um, Also, identify high emission suppliers and engage with them on best practices. And lastly, look at reporting and transparency. So, regularly report on your carbon emissions and reduction progress through sustainability reports or platforms like the CDP. So, lastly, after you've identified the high risk areas within your operations, it's important to make changes in how you conduct business to ensure sustainability as a part of the ethos of your operations. So, a few ways that you can do this is by maybe switching to renewable energy sources where possible, look to reduce your waste. Maybe swap out your traditional methods of packaging and use more eco friendly materials, and also work with suppliers who are leaders within the sustainability space in order to ensure that you're aiming for one goal, one common goal. So, another method to incorporate sustainability into your business operations is to look at the circular economy principles. So, the circular economy is a model of production and consumption, which involves sharing, reusing, repairing, and recycling existing materials and products for as long as possible. In this way, the life cycle of the products is therefore extended. So, in the next two slides, we will discuss the key principles and what they mean in the context of a business. So, the first principle is designing out waste. And what that means is to build products and have systems in place to minimize waste and pollution. This could involve using sustainable materials and ensuring products are reused and recycled. And the next principle is methods of extending the product lifespan. And so this is just ensuring that the product can either be upgraded, repaired, or reused for a longer life. The third principle, regenerate natural systems. So this is reducing the reliance on natural finite resources and thinking about regenerative practices that enhance the health of our ecosystem, things such as regenerative agriculture. So closing the loop, what this means is ensuring that biodegradable and non-biodegradable materials are not left as waste, but are either returned to the environment via processes such as composting, or for non-biodegradable items, they are reused, repaired, and recycled. It's important to ensure that you foster collaboration, and it's important to recognize the interdependence within supply chains, ecosystems, and communities. So engaging and collaborating with your various stakeholders will be crucial in order to adopt these principles. And lastly, look to embrace innovation. And so this could be via product design, adapting your business models, and also looking to embrace new technology. So ensure your systems and processes are designed to be adaptable to change, whether due to technological advances, resource availability, or consumer behavior. So we'll take a closer look at one of these circular economy principles and dive deeper into the reducing your reliance on natural ecosystems principle. So here's an example of how you can reduce your reliance on natural ecosystems via sustainable agricultural practices. So, adopting sustainable farming practices, as it stands today, farming practices are damaging to the environment and can lead to things such as soil erosion, pollution and contamination from pesticides and fertilizers. So, by offering training and sharing sustainable farming practices, you can support your suppliers in adopting those practices. Um, Agricultural practices also involve high usage of water and energy. And so, a way in which to support suppliers is by adopting sustainable systems, by providing financial incentives, and encouraging the adoption of efficient irrigation systems and renewable energy infrastructure. So, when you look at enhancing soil fertility and biodiversity, pollutants and fertilizers are damaging to soil fertility and biodiversity. So, encouraging and supporting to use organic fertilizers through subsidization and encouraging the adoption of agroforestry is a way to tackle this as well. And finally, we are aware that agriculture is synonymous with high levels of waste. So, collaborating with your suppliers to develop waste reduction plans, maybe providing composting equipment, or helping them create a take back program for packaging materials would help support in the waste reduction. In order to encourage these behaviours, it's just important to recognise and reward suppliers who do adopt such practices. So, market leaders within sustainability are now looking to adopt the latest technologies to help them gather high quality data and to increase the transparency and to enable them to make effective changes and reach their sustainability targets. So, a few examples of technologies that we're seeing being adopted across multiple industries. First one being Internet of Things, or known as IoT devices. And this can monitor resource use, such as water or energy of raw materials in real time. And this allows for more efficient management and immediate action to reduce waste. Many companies can invest in IoT infrastructure, and you can provide training to your staff to use this data effectively and also integrate IoT data with other supply chain management systems. Big data analytics is something else that companies are using. So, analyzing vast amounts of data from across the supply chain to identify patterns, inefficiencies, and opportunities for reducing your environmental impact. And it's really important to invest in a robust data analytics platform and to ensure all relevant data is collected and you're integrating data from various different sources. AI and machine learning is a very hot topic at the moment, and companies are thinking of ways to use this to possibly predict demand, maybe optimize inventory levels, and forecast supply chain disruptions to help minimize waste and reduce overproduction. And lastly, cloud-based platform, and this would help facilitate collaboration amongst suppliers, manufacturers, and retailers by providing shared access to data and tools to enable more coordinated sustainability practices. So, sustainability should be viewed holistically because it's a complex issue that involves many interconnected aspects of society and the environment. So, in the next section, we will look at what this means, how a holistic view can benefit your business, and tools and frameworks you can use to achieve this. So here are a few examples of why it's important to look at environment from a social, holistically in terms of social environmental data points. I'll touch on a few of these as examples. So climate change is typically viewed as an environmental issue. However, marginalized communities are typically more vulnerable to climate change impacts due to limited resources and adaptive capacity. Another example is health and safety. So, poor environmental conditions can exacerbate social inequities, leading to higher rates of disease and lower life expectancies in disadvantaged communities. And I'll just touch on one more example if we look at disaster risk reduction. So, environmental factors such as the frequency and intensity of natural disasters intersect with social factors like population density, infrastructure quality, and emergency preparedness. So, here's how a holistic approach can impact your business in a really positive way. So, by looking at sustainability from a holistic perspective, you can have a more robust risk management system. Understanding the interoperability of environment and social risks can help you be more informed of the effects and how one could impact the other, enabling your risk management practices to be more robust. Also, a business that demonstrates strong environmental stewardship and social responsibility can enhance its reputation with new and existing customers. And it will also enable you to build goodwill with local communities where your business operates. In terms of creating efficiencies, understanding social environmental impacts in your supply chain can lead to better supply selection and management, and can also reduce the risk of disruption and improve the resilience and efficiency of your supply chain. Legal and regulatory compliance is a hot topic. So, by integrating environmental and social considerations, your business can more easily comply with the current and future regulations. A more proactive approach at looking at this together can prevent legal issues, reduce the risk of fines, and help you avoid the costs associated with non compliance. And finally, accessing capital. So, investors are increasingly interested in businesses that prioritize ESG criteria. So, integrating environmental and social considerations can make your business more attractive to investors, particularly those that are focused on sustainable and impact investing. So, how can you get started at looking at environmental and social elements together, and which existing frameworks and tools could you use as a starting point? So I've listed a few frameworks and tools that you could use to support. So the Environmental Management System and the CSR frameworks. These are international standard frameworks that would help provide guidance on how you can be more socially and environmentally responsible and how you can improve your performance in these areas. There are existing reporting frameworks such as GRI, SASB, and TNFD that will help you to establish your social and environmental data that you'll need to collect relative to the industry that you operate in. And lastly, the UN Sustainable Development Goals. By aligning to some of these goals, which do touch on social and environment, you'll be signaling your dedication to sustainability to your key stakeholders. And in terms of tools to support, we'll do a quick plug, but there are supply chain management tools. An example would be SEDEX, where we do collect social and environmental data from your suppliers, and a few more examples such as the circular economy tools. Cradle to Cradle is a certification that touches on social and environmental elements as well.
So in terms of actionable next steps, really a key part is determining which regulations apply to you. So conducting an assessment to understand which regulations are applicable to your company and when you need to comply with them. Once you've understood which regulations you need to comply with, conducting a gap assessment is really essential so that you're clear on the regulation requirements and understanding where you meet those requirements and more critically, where you don't. By conducting a gap analysis will help you identify the actions you need to take and resources you need to allocate to meet your regulatory requirements. Aligning to an established framework or standard that we've discussed on occasions through this presentation is really helpful and useful to doing that. Most regulations, as we've touched on, align with common and well-established reporting frameworks and standard, like SASB, TCFD, or GRI, for example. Companies that already use these are well placed to streamline their reporting processes already. And for those not already doing so, aligning to them is really going to help with this in the future. The next step is really to build a strong governance model. Determine how you're going to structure your team and the resources and tools you require to meet your compliance requirements. And then the next step would be to develop a comprehensive ESG management system. Make sure your environmental and broader social and governance management systems are comprehensive and not just focused on complying with each regulation in isolation. Taking that holistic approach is just going to be far more efficient, far more cost effective, and position you well to comply in the future. And of course, one of the key points here is tell your story. Be transparent. A lot of focus is around the risk and impact, but actually one of the key opportunities, and I don't think enough focus is on opportunities, use that data to tell your story. The disclosures you make a compelling story that stakeholders are interested in. So being transparent with this represents a great opportunity to build that value with your clients and stakeholders. So take advantage of that. And then Tom, that's over to you.
Awesome, thanks, Harley. And sorry about the noise. You met our chief marketing officer there from our side. Just quickly, so obviously we spoke a lot of detail there about the environmental and sustainable solutions. Sedex can help in many ways. You'll have the slides, so you'll be able to learn more about these different solutions and a bit more about Sedex as well. So, seeing that's the end of the portion of our webinar, we've got time for questions. So if you do have any more questions, please put them in a chat box and we can ask them to our speakers live. So we've got a few here. So I'll see who can be best answer them. So Dennis asks, are there alternatives that prioritize social, environmental and governance concerns over profit, as current approaches and laws emphasize financial gains, profitability before sustainability and ethical practices? Ollie, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think that's obviously the kind of moral dichotomy that a lot of this is driven by finance and profitability. But I think, in essence, that's not. That we should embrace that, because ultimately, it will drive change. Finance does drive change, and a lot of the regulations and reporting requirements will holistically, by default drive change. So whether it's, SEC's climate disclosure ruling or California's State Bill 253 or 261 or CSRD in Europe, the focus on financial impact and the associated with climate risk will drive change at large, globally across businesses. Of course, it would be great to have a more, alternative approach, as the question asks, around social, environmental, and governance. And I guess the way to do that, if you're, not caught up in having to, adhere to a regulation or a reporting framework, is alignment to, B Corp, which, is a corporate structure that looks to balance, profit and purpose, so it looks to kind of delineate the two, or, use a triple bottom line company that looks to, measure corporate excess, not just in terms of financial performance, but also in terms of its social and environmental impacts. But I think, in the context of this presentation and discussion, a lot of the regulation, whilst focused around, financial and kind of climate risk, does positively and hopefully positively drive change. And I think, that approach that the EU has taken with that holistic focus on ES and G together really starts to build momentum and drive that change. Just the sheer scope of companies that are going to get caught up in that. So hopefully, Dennis, that answers your questions in terms of alternative. But happy to expand on it if need to be.
I
Great.
think just to add to that as well, I think it's about looking at short-term and long-term financial performance as well. So there could be higher operational costs when you're incorporating sustainable practices in the short term, but over the long term, it should be more efficient. So, including energy efficiency processes in the long term, would reduce your costs overall. And also having access to capital as well. There are a lot of financial institutions that do promote and would rather invest in companies that have good ESG practices as they're seen as more lower risk. So that's another way to look at it as well, just to kind of add to what Harley's already said as well.
Brilliant. Thanks, Byra. We've got a question here saying, is there a threshold to company size or turnover before CSRD becomes a requirement? So I can answer that, and Harley, Byra, feel free to add to it if you want. But obviously, there's minimum requirements, and it depends sort of what industry and whether or not you're in the EU or not. But we know that from January 21st, 2025, CSRD will apply to large companies that meet at least two of these criteria, which is a 25 million plus balance sheet, or a 50 million plus turnover, or have over 250 employees. So I don't know if Harley or Byra, you want to add anything else to that as well? They're being done in phases.
No, I don't. I think that's pretty much what I would have said.
We've got a question here. Companies following under the CSRD scope, should they also report on ISSB, or already by reporting according to CSRD, companies can skip ISSB? Harley?
Well, I mean, ISSB and IFRS are not mandatory. They are at the discretion of the company to report. They just provide the framework for companies to report under. So if you are caught up in CSRD, you're required to report under CSRD, then it's entirely optional for you to report on ISSB, IFRS, S1 and S2. However, if you did choose to do that, there is a good level of interoperability between the IFRS S1 and S2 modules and the climate change elements of CSRD's ESRS E1, which is the climate change module. So it's a good example of, in looking at if you need to comply with a certain regulation, but you're already reporting with a framework like ISSB, you're well positioned to meet the requirements of another regulation, if that makes sense. But having to comply with both, CSRD, if you're kind of caught up in the compliance requirements, is the one that you should focus on, and ISSB is the kind of optional if you choose to disclose under that framework.
Right. Thanks, Harley. There's a question, I don't have much context, from Kelsey. Does this include local farmers, growers, if you are receiving materials straight from the fields? I'm not sure. Does that mean anything, Harley, without context?
I think I could do with a bit more context on that one. But
Kelsey, if you could just add your question with a bit more context so we can get Harley to answer that would be great. We've got a question here. How can companies prepare for the digital product passport? Is there any IT support for data needed throughout the value chain for DPP?
There are existing platforms. And I don't have too much specialist knowledge in this, but I know there are like blockchain-based platforms. I think SAP and a few have some that incorporate or help support the digital passport process. Sorry, what was the question again?
Sorry, Byron.
It's okay.
It was, how can companies prepare for the digital products passport? Is there any IT to support the data needed throughout the value chain for DPP?
Yeah, so there are technologies that are available. So I guess adopting these technologies and combining it with your standard data reporting as well would kind of help you develop compliance. You obviously need to do some supply chain mapping and make sure that you're kind of able to, track the journey across the supply chain. but I think we're at the pretty early stages of development for these digital passports. So yeah, sorry, I don't have too much knowledge on that, but I can provide more context after this session.
Great, thank you, Bayer. Question for you both. When doing self-assessment, how to ensure the data is accurate, complete, and ensure suppliers are not shortcutting to provide data? Bayer, do you want to take that one?
So to how to ensure that the data is accurate. So in terms of, is this via collecting data from your suppliers, how to ensure
Yeah,
that accuracy?
I think when we're talking about collecting data through some of our tools like the environmental self-assessment questionnaire.
Yeah. So I think in terms of like ensuring good quality data, I think the feedback that we've heard from the research that we've done when we were developing our environmental SAQ was that suppliers maybe lacked the understanding of what was being asked of them and possibly the tools to collect sufficient data. So I think in order to collect good quality data, you would actually need to provide a lot of hands-on support to your suppliers. So ongoing training, and ensuring that they have the systems and tools in place to collect the data that you need is going to be key. And this has to be something that happens on an ongoing basis and not just a one-off. Also looking at third-party platforms as well to kind of help facilitate and consolidate that information would also be a good move to ensure that you get the best quality data.
Awesome.
Yeah, and just building on that, I think it's that point. It's about engaging with your suppliers and supply chain, and really using that as an opportunity to build collaborative approach to this. We've seen a lot of hesitancy from suppliers to supply data, and a lot of that is around concern about, are they supplying the right data? Certainly something we've tried to build into our ESAQ self-assessment products is the ability to determine the data quality and aligning it to the kind of data requirements of reporting frameworks or regulatory frameworks means that we're looking to capture data in the format, or the type of data in the format required by those bodies, so the user can determine to some degree the level of quality. But it's an iterative process. It's determining the starting point to make an assessment of the data quality that you can then look to put in place a strategy to improve over time.
Brilliant. Thanks, Harley. There's a really interesting question here. How do you think businesses should budget for these legislations, and how much do you forecast this costing at surface level? I don't know if we're going to be able to get too much specific there, but quite an interesting question there.
I think in terms of forecasting, that's very difficult. It really depends on your business operations, the industry you sit in, the legal implications for not incorporating sustainability into your business operations. I think is like the first place to actually look at. Is there going to be a detrimental effect to my company over the short term or the long term if I don't incorporate these practices, and budgeting that effectively? There are upcoming regulations such as EUDR that does have a severe direct financial implication in the very near future, especially for food and agricultural companies. So it's really just taking a look at the industry that you're in. I think legislation is a good starting point, and specific regulations where there are financial implications, and then kind of prioritizing which is going to have the most financial impact. And then over the long term, by incorporating sustainability, how could you increase your business operational efficiencies, and make your company more sustainable, even from a financial perspective as well?
Yeah, I think the kind of starting point here is because it's how long's a piece of string. What's the scale of the problem? And I think that first step is in terms of that next steps, which we touched on in the last slide, is like, first off, identify the relevant legislation, know what you need to comply with. That's going to help you size the scale of the problem. So, do I need to be compliant with CSRD? Do I need to be compliant with EUDR? They've all got their own set of metrics that you'll need to report on. CSRD's got over 1,000 data points. EUDR's got complexity around geolocation. So knowing what legislation you need to comply with is going to set that foundational piece for you to kind of start your assessment. Then when you know what you need to comply with, you can determine what the potential impact is, as Byron said about with the financial impact of non-compliance. I think EUDR is 4% of disclosed turnover. Then you can go about the means of assessing your internal capabilities. How well resourced are you to meet these requirements, and that's where the gap analysis comes in. Once you've assessed that, how much of a gap you need to fill to kind of meet that requirement. And all of these points are going to help you to determine the associated cost. You might only have to comply with one regulation, and you've got a well-resourced sustainability team, in which case the kind of cost is obviously going to be lower. But versus you might have multiple regulations to comply with, a very under-resourced sustainability team, and be exposed to risks of non-compliance, in which case the cost is going to be far higher. But I think it's really about taking that kind of logical approach that we've tried to lay out in the kind of actionable next steps to really determine the scale of the problem and what you need to comply with to help you really make those kind of informed assessments, judgments on the associated costs and resources that you need.
Awesome. Thanks, both. There's a question here from Neil, which I think we get quite often, which is around, would you have experience of dealing with smaller suppliers who don't currently have the capability or resources to provide emissions data? So how are each such suppliers handled as to develop rather than exclude them?
I think it's, I've spoke about opportunity and about engagement, and I think this is really, key. I think it's demystifying as well why you're asking about these things. In our experience, a lot of smaller suppliers, a lot of smaller sites are concerned about why this, what's this data? Why are clients asking for this data? Why do I need to supply it? I think, providing that reassurance, being clear about why you need it and what you need it for, will help that engagement, and it's about bringing, we're only going to achieve the levels of reducing, greenhouse gases or, many of the other environmental impacts through collaboration and by bringing, the supply chains en masse up with us. So it's about collaborating. It's about being clear and open about why you want to collect this data and helping them on that journey, aside from the companies that are kind of in the mid or advanced stages of kind of their environmental journey, most people are just starting out. So I would take this as the opportunity to engage, have those discussions, and look to collectively improve your capability so as not to exclude them. Make them feel part of the journey. Your story is also their story. So use that. Kind of really latch onto that, because I think there's real value in that. There's real opportunity. And that's a key part of a lot of the kind of regulations that we've discussed, is not only the impacts and risks that a company represents, but also the opportunities. So whether that's opportunities for transition to renewable energy, or for water conservation, having those conversations is going to making those assessments is going to help you bring those suppliers along with you on your journey, and collectively make a difference. I hope that kind of answers your question in a cohesive way.
I think also, just to add, for smaller suppliers, the financial pressure and also the lack of resources they have internally can make it much more challenging for them to help provide data or help you comply with any kind of regulations or supply the data that you need. So it's really important to kind of think of ways in which you can support them, and it might be through using a third-party tool that can actually have a more hands-on approach, or developing an internal team within your organization to actually help support them and be that additional resource that they may not have. So just thinking of like creative, innovative ways to kind of release that financial pressure, educate them, and be that extra resource that they may not have, will enable you to kind of work with those smaller suppliers more effectively.
Brilliant. Thank you both. We've only got time for a couple more questions before we have to end the session. So this is a quick one. This is going to test your knowledge, Harley. What does SASB stand for? I missed that slide.
Sustainability Accounting Standards Board.
Lovely. Well done. Thanks, Harley.
And the good thing about SASB is that also they are owned by ISSB and IFRS. So there's great alignment if ISSB and the IFRS reporting framework is something that you would looking to align to. SASB also provides the guidance on E, S, and G materiality. And by materiality, I mean the categories of those things are relevant to you in the industry that you operate. So yeah, SASB is a great resource for identifying materiality.
Brilliant. Thanks, Harley. This is an interesting question. Many of the reporting requirements and the regulatory landscape is being driven by the EU. How might that impact US companies that do substantial business with European partners and maybe down the value chain for scope 3 for those parties?
I mean, it's interesting because both CSRD and EUDR have had pushback from the US because of the complexity and challenge in US companies meeting those requirements. I mean, ultimately, those regulations are coming into effect, next year. Whether your company meets the kind of non-EU classification for CSRD or EUDR, if it does, then obviously, that means you have to meet the compliance requirement, and you'll be required to put in place the kind of structures and resources for you to meet that requirement. But I think it's about understanding the problem. I think, and I think the critical step for, and I can see in the comment section here that there's a lot of uncertainty, and the problem is uncertainty, that a lot of companies are uncertain about the regulation and how applicable it is to you. I can't speak, specifically to your company, without, knowing this particular, turnover, the business that you do with Europe. But that's where this kind of assessment comes in. So using and that might be employing a third-party consultancy or employing your own kind of sustainability team to kind of do that discovery work to see if you're required to comply with that regulation. And once you've understood that, then you know what the problem is, and like in any case, you can make a plan to kind of meet that requirement. But that really is the critical first step: understanding if it's a requirement of your company to comply with it, and then conduct that gap analysis to see what you already comply with based on your current resources and where the gaps are, so that you can plan to meet the kind of requirement and invest in those gaps to fill it with the resources required.
Yeah, I definitely recommend getting in touch with our team. So we've got various support and solutions for companies. Specifically, we've got our own consulting team that can help you with your own requirements. We've got loads of case studies as well about how we've helped companies with that as well, and help with the phasing and programs. So definitely feel free to reach out to our team, and we'll look to support you where we can. Last question. This is quite a broad one, but are there any industry-wide benchmarks regarding water usage, fuel usage for different types of products?
There are materiality assessment frameworks that actually look at things like water usage and energy usage, and that sort of rank companies based on the industry that they sit in, whether the water usage that they have is material or not. I know one framework that Harley mentioned, SASB, actually does have that materiality framework, and there are a few financial institutions that also have that as well, such as MSCI and S&P as well. But yeah, I can't think of any more off the top of my head, but I think there are quite a few industry benchmarks that you could use.
Brilliant. Thanks, Byron. And with that, we're going to have to wrap up the question. We really appreciate you attending our online webinar today. Quick plug, if you are around North America and Chicago, we've got an event, so it would be great if you could join us. But otherwise, please reach out to any of the resources that we've left in the attachment section, or reach out to one of our team and we'll be glad to help you. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day. Thank you very much and goodbye.
Bye.